So on a scale of 1 to 10, how sexy is Judge Death?
Wait,
We are back at this.
how did we start this with you being the creep?
I thought I'd get in early.
God. Oh, welcome to In Orbit every Wednesday.
Get 2000 AD now. Get.
Well, Borag Thung Earthlets, this is In Orbit every Wednesday. I am your host, Molch-R. This is your host, KLO-E, and you'll notice that we are joined this week by a special guest, someone who apparently is no stranger to the world of 2000 AD, Anna Smith Spark. Welcome to In Orbit every Wednesday.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. The reason we've got you on is because your novel,
Short novel, but novel, yes.
Anderson versus Death is coming out imminently, and so we thought we'd get you on to have a chat. It's been a while since we've talked about the kind of prose stuff that we do with 2000 AD at Rebellion. So this is kind of we had a long run of novellas, which is why my brain went novella rather than double checking. But this is like the first kind of novel that we've done for a while, based in the world of Judge Dredd. But I wanted to kind of start the conversation by asking you what's, because I've seen the way that you've talked about like Judge Dredd and Judge Anderson 2000 AD online. I wanted to start with the question: what's your favorite Judge Death moment?
Oh goodness, I have to choose. I just actually, I mean, Necropolis is just, that's not really a moment, is it? No,
It's a big moment.
Quite a long moment. But actually, in some ways, I mean, Mortis is actually absolutely my favourite of the Dark Judges. I mean, Judge Death is just unbelievably cool, but there's just something about Judge Mortis that he is just so horribly creepy that some of the panels he's in, he's just so yeah, and he's always absolutely got to me, really haunted me.
Brings an extra creep factor.
He does, and I always love the fact that when the Dark Judges first appear as a foursome, they feel so right.
Yeah,
Like there's kind of then no real variation in what they're about and how they look for, best part of 30 odd years. And it's the fact that Judge Mortis is stood there with a sheep skull.
yes.
And you don't question it.
Yes. Yes, I write about him quite a lot in the he's in the novel quite a lot, as he's absolutely my favourite. And yeah, there's a little bit where I sort of feel we have to sort of account for how he's somehow ended up with a sheep skull, because which we don't obviously, but because the others, they kind of make sense the way they look like they do. But Mortis, he's got flippers, he's got like these weird bony flippers, he's got a tail, he's got his sheep skull head. But there's a wonderful thing I read with just Brian Brolin saying he saw a sheep skull on Dartmoor, and that was where he got the idea for what Mortis would look like. And I've had exactly that experience. We have friends who live quite near Dartmoor, and we used to go there a lot and wander around Dartmoor, and there are loads of sheep skulls lying around on Dartmoor, often in a state of sort of obviously a rather battered state because they've been out in the moor over the winter with sort of mold, with sort of moss growing on them and things. And you do just see them like that. So, and actually, I think kind of Mortis kind of digs into me a bit because of that. That kind of I've had that same experience of like that weirdness of it. In fact, we had one for reasons known only to himself, my father picked one up from Dartmoor, took it home and put it in a plant pot in his study, which was where the telephone, in those days, long ago, kids, when telephones had a cable and were attached to the wall and you had to sit there on the phone. So I would spend hours on the phone chatting to friends as a teenager, staring at this moss-covered rather battered sheep skull staring back at me. So yeah, it kind of...
You were primed. You were primed to write this story.
Yes.
I was just about to say, is this your origin story as a writer, Anna? Because this sounds like quite it's the things that you see every day that you don't necessarily register, that perhaps just kind of, embed themselves in your psyche.
I had a blessed childhood. I got lost in my entire family. We got lost after dark on the salt marshes behind Dunwich once when I was a child. Yeah.
No notes. End of episode. No, I do know what you mean. It's one of those. It's one of those moments when I was younger where we were on like a moorland in Yorkshire or something like that, and there was this babbling brook, and I was like, oh, I'll drink some of this water, and my dad went, no, don't do that. And I went, why? It looks perfectly fine. And he just pointed up, and there was basically just a dead sheep in the stream further up. And you go, oh, lovely. That's so nice. Nature just fills me with joy and happiness and wonderful.
I'm so glad that England's not real. Like,
I mean, to paraphrase, if England were not real, it would be necessary for somebody to invent it. But yeah, in terms of Judge Death, because we're going to talk specifically about the book in a bit, but in terms of Judge Death, why is he a compelling? In your view, why is he a compelling villain? Because we've kind of picked over it a little bit on the show before, and have our own views. But why for you, Anna, is he this kind of iconic villain?
I think it is, a lot of it is the way he's drawn, that he is just so perfectly drawn. I mean, he's genuinely extremely creepy. You can feel and smell him in the image, all of the imagery. If you look, he's very often shown in actually a kind of really disturbingly sexual way. His crotch is very often completely central stage in the imagery. He is disturbingly kind of sexual in a way he really shouldn't be, given his death. But he is, you really get this sense of him and everything about him just from the images, just from the pictures of him. In fact, I did a thing with a local magazine, which was the person running it she vaguely, she was, she's my age. She'd heard of Judge Dredd. She'd she'd got beyond knowing about Judge Dredd because her older brother read it when she was a child, blah, 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 as kind of pretty much everyone my age in Britain. But I said, and she was saying, so I showed her a picture. She was like, oh my God, that's horrible. And she was expecting, she was like, so you've written this book that's based on what was basically a comic book for teenagers in her perspective. And she's like, expecting to see Batman or the Joker or, this comic book villain. And she was just like, oh my God, that's horrible. Like, put it away, make it go away. And there's just something about, he is so much more than, in the way he's drawn, than so many comic book villains. He's really absolute genius piece of art. And then, again, that as soon as you have that logic, and as soon as you have that kind of logical, the crime is life, and you're like, yeah, that absolutely follows. You can completely see the logic in that, and you can see how easy it is for so many different regimes to have got so close to that point. It's not the kind of absurdity of the comic book supervillain. It is genuinely deeply plausible that someone can become like that, and that someone could take that position. We are so close to people taking that position at the moment. And in fact, when you look back at some of the kind of things like his origin story, there's so much in there about things like the incel movement, the kind of nihilism in American school shootings and things, which people weren't really aware of at the time he was first created, but seems so prescient and almost so obvious. You know, he was one of those teenage boys at home, never leaving his basement. You know all of that about him, and it's really frightening the way that is never spelt out, because it couldn't have been spelt out at the time, but it's all just there in him. He's just he's an absolute moment of genius that encapsulates so much about all the worst aspects of current society, I think, or a lot of the worst aspects of current society. And he's just somehow there in this guy who also makes these ridiculous puns that are so awfully on the cusp of being the most appalling dad jokes, and it's which I also love, that kind of.
It does kind of like, but I feel like that ends up going hand in hand. I feel like dad jokes are part of the hellish,
Yes,
the hellish aspect of it. The way that you're talking about it, it kind of feels like you can clearly see that it's something that, like, a character concept that you're very passionate about, and that feels very, very appropriate for the Queen of Grimdark. Did it just kind of fit together for you?
I think he probably was. I think Judge Dredd and Judge Death and Slain, I think, were certainly huge things that shaped a huge part of everything I write now. I kind of, I got into 2000 AD before I could really read, because and actually so many women, particularly my age, say this, that there was an older boy down the road. We went to school. His mum took us to school, and he was a couple of years older than me. So therefore, and he was cool. He was a cool boy, and he was he was at secondary school, and I was only at primary school, and he was really, really into 2000 AD, and he was doing art, spit on those big art folders, and it was covered in Tipex doodles of the 2000 AD logo and the Judge Dredd logo and the helmet and all of that sort of stuff. And I would have been, I think I worked out, I must have been 6. And, so before I'd ever read an issue of the comic, I'd just seen these incredibly cool images that this really quite cool guy, whose whole family were really quite cool, and who were really good friends of ours, sort of just had. I'd see it in the car every day for a year. And then kind of
impression.
Yes. And then once a bit older, my dad would buy, he was buying sort of the back copies, so we get this kind of weird. I mean, again, it's really weird trying to explain this to people even a couple of years younger than me. That kind of, you couldn't buy collected volumes. You couldn't buy secondhand volumes online. There wasn't no online. You go to a church fete and someone would be selling this massive big wad of tooth. People would be selling, or a secondhand bookshop, people would be selling these big piles of comics and magazine back issues, and you'd buy a big pile, and it would just be completely random back issues, and we'd buy these random back issues of 2000 AD. So you'd never read a full story. You'd never ever obviously get the beginning, the middle, and the end, but you just get these random snapshots. And I just absolutely fell in love with Judge Dredd, and particularly with Slain, and that has always stayed with me. I sort of stopped reading the comic when I was older, and then my son we then got into, and he's now massive fan. But as soon as we first gave him a collected edition, I was like, oh my god, I remember this so it was that kind of Proustian, like, oh my god, I remember this just being just so amazingly exciting. And yes, I mean, it clearly did have the most intense kind of effect on me. And in some ways it's possibly the story I was born to write. I mean, all my stuff that isn't in a different IP is high fantasy. It's blokes with swords, it's dragons, it's magic. And then, but in some ways this story was kind of the story I was born to write, because they're characters. They're two characters that obsessed me my whole life, and that I've known since I was really small.
They've been following you around.
They have, yes, yes.
Well, let's explain the grimdark thing, because this was a kind of label that's been put onto you because of your previous work. What is grimdark meant to be in a literary sense?
Okay, Grimdark comes from, it was apparently originally a term of insult. It comes from the tagline for Warhammer 40k, in the grimdark future there is only war. And so it was applied to, in fact, to fantasy, not science fiction. But it's applied to books like Abercrombie and Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns and Game of Thrones, in that these are very bleak fantasy novels. These are not Lord of the Rings. There is a hero. He is fundamentally good. We know good is going to win. It's not that, yes, it's dark, but it's not just dark. It's that it's cynical. It isn't. I mean, I think 2000 AD had a huge, sort of 2000 AD had a huge impact in shaping the writing style of a lot of the people who went on to write what was considered, what was labelled in, I think, the 2010s as grimdark. It's got that 2000 AD, Time Bandits, Monty Python vibe to basically life is pretty shit, and pretty much everyone is basically on the make. And, if someone stands up and says they are the hero and they're going to nobly sacrifice themselves to make the world a better place, they're probably in it because they're playing an angle, and there isn't a happy ending. It is fairly remorseless, but within that, as with Anderson, and why everybody I think loves Anderson so much, there's that humanity. There's that kind of, it's not about that kind of great noble Aragorn, I'm the destined king, I'm going to suffer all this, but I'm also in some way, the warrior Christ. It's about Anderson. Someone like Anderson is just there as, I'm just a human being. I care. I have such a huge heart, and this world I live in is so awful. And maybe I can make things better for one kid somewhere. And that's about all I can hope for, but that's probably got to be enough. But yeah, it's that. I think 2008. I think 2008 had a huge amount of influence in shaping it, in that kind of remorselessness, and the cynicism, this sort of, the kind of things like Strontium Dobbs, the ABC Warriors, that sense of bleakness, remorselessness, that this is a world that has just gone to hell and is only going to get worse. And yet within that, there are kind of moments, there are those human moments and those moments of caring and compassion. And that's basically what grimdark is. And I kind of
blip of hope in the cynicism.
Yes. But it is it's fundamentally kind of epic fantasy in a world that's nihilistic, I guess, in the way that 2000 AD is human, but in a fairly nihilistic world. Megacity 1 isn't somehow going to redeem itself. It's kind of, whatever happens to them, they're not, it's a very negative view of humanity, but at the same time a very real view of humanity, in that these aren't people with some kind of, they're very relatable people, which is grimdark, is again that kind of, these are real people. These are people who are frightened, who are actually, early Terry Pratchett in some ways I always think of as very grimdark. Rincewind is really grimdark.
Yeah,
he's like
I
a
can see
2000
that.
character. He's constantly scared. He's constantly running away. He's constantly he's very human. He's kind of doing what most of us would actually do if we were confronted with the Dark Lord, which is collaborate, run away, and cry.
Well, let's talk about Anderson versus Death, because this really is kind of like the ultimate kind of locked room, not murder mystery, but kind of a situation where, for those of us who know our 2000 AD history, it's that moment after the first Judge Death story where Death and Anderson weren't intended to be recurring characters, so Anderson gets sealed into a slab of plastic, Boing, with Judge Death trapped in her head, and this novel is set in Anderson's head during this time. Tell us a little bit about how this novel came to be and your process of approaching it.
I actually begged to be able to do it. I begged to
Right.
do it because as soon I sort of David Thomas Moore, who I know socially, and I actually began by he came and sort of I came out. I was sort of fantasy convention, and I came and sort of sat at a table that he then came to join the group of people at the table, and I saw the Rebellion look. I was like, because my son was massively into 2000 AD, and he had all the big A4 size collected volumes. So basically, at that point, you couldn't move in my house without falling over a collected Judge Dredd volume. And I made some joke about, like, God, you're giving me PTSD, David. I can't sit down on my sofa because it's so covered in back copies of Judge Dredd. And for some reason, we got talking about kind of. Oh, it was because going totally off the subject, completely off the subject, but the only author my son is impressed I know is Danny Ware, who wrote one of the stories in Judge Anderson Year 2. He is totally unimpressed that I know Steve Erickson. He is totally unimpressed that I know Joe Abercrombie. He's totally unimpressed by all these people. But when I said I know Danny Ware, who wrote Judge Anderson Year 2, he was absolutely overcome with amazement. And I mentioned this to Dave, and he said something about Judge Anderson Year 3 being about Judge Anderson and death, but it wasn't written. And I was basically like, oh my God, I would that I was born to write that book. I love those characters. And yeah, and he was like, that would be cool. And then later, when it all actually happened, and yeah, suddenly I was like, okay, so they're stuck in Anderson's head and she's stuck in plastic. I mean, obviously we know, so this is good in some ways. I know where it begins. I don't have this. I'm very much a pantser novelist, and I just generally I'm like, I don't know who these people are, I don't know what's going on. And it's like, okay, I know where I begin. This is a good start. And then it's like, okay, so I know where I end. And everyone knows where I end. But neither of them can die. Neither of them can die anyway. I mean, death can't die anyway. Everyone knows where this is going to end up. Nothing can actually happen because this is only in someone's head. So, in fact, the stakes are incredibly low because no one can actually come to any harm. I've got somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words to fill. With two people.
A lot to work around.
Someone's yes. And yes. And yeah. And then I was like sort of staring at it, kind of, okay, I can see why this was not written up until this point. But me having to solve that problem of we all know where this is going to end up. There is no possibility for actual peril and actual moments of kind of Game of Thrones style. Oh my God, she's done a red wedding on us. What do we do? Really made me push myself and really actually made me kind of do some really interesting things with it. So, it inevitably has to get quite interception in different levels of psyche and Anderson's thoughts, and then Death's thoughts in Anderson's thoughts, and then Anderson's thoughts in Death's thoughts, and Anderson's thoughts, and that kind of level of, they're kind of basically melded at this point. And also, also there was a lot of scope for doing the kind of wonderfully wibbly bits in some of those 2008, some of the Judge Dredd episodes, like the original Boing one, which is not about plot. It's not about. It's just all the stuff. The stuff about. There's all that stuff about the people with the guy. He makes his nose as long as possible, and kind of
the snort. Yeah.
Yes, and the crazes, and all that stuff that's there in 2000 AD that actually just the bits a lot of people really remember, the bits that are just the insanity of the world, and just really enjoying taking the way. Again, it's completely plausible and convincing. Anything that they predicted in the early editions of 2000 AD, we haven't got, but we've got stuff that's actually equally as insane. My children are obsessed with watching this thing at the moment. Is It Cake? Which is where bakers make objects out of cake. And you're like, that is totally if you can imagine everybody in Mega City 1 is actually the crime rate has dropped because everybody is at home watching Is It Cake? And kind of the judges are all suffering from they're all sitting around in the canteen bored because there's no crime for a week because everyone's just at home watching Is It Cake. You can imagine that as an episode. So going with some of that stuff and just going with, okay, I'm just going to write some stuff about the insanity of the world they're living in and just go for it with the humour and the kind of some of the referential stuff. I mean, she's wrapped in plastic. I think I say she's wrapped in plastic. She's dead, wrapped in plastic. I think I say that about 4 times. And then, there's kind of all of those kind of in-jokes and references. And again, the kind of the Cursed Earth, the episode where Judge Dredd gets kind of muddled up with the kind of parody of June and all of that sort of stuff. There's so much. I had all the space to just go for some of that just really fun lunacy, just playing around with the world, which was really lovely. And then also do some really kind of quite serious, kind of fairly political stuff going into Death and Mortis and what they're actually doing. So there's the Fall of a Dead World novel, graphic novels, which I don't particularly enjoy because I think they're very humorless, but to kind of take some of that kind of going into the psyche of Death and Mortis. As I said, unpacking this stuff, which I think is just so much there about the kind of fascists, obviously the kind of fascist nature of what they're thinking, but the kind of contemporary nature of a lot of what they're thinking, to kind of riff on some of the stuff about kind of crime and zero tolerance and creating a kind of safe environment for our women and children, and going with some of that stuff, which was kind of, so it's a kind of massive, there are kind of massive tonal shifts, I guess, which was kind of again fitting for the way that the comic book works. And kind of, I was really aware all the time I was writing it that no matter how much I push myself in terms of my prose, no matter how much I might think that's a damn fine paragraph, this is a pale shadow of the original thing. This is not, the original is the comic book, and that is perfect. And what I'm doing is a kind of spin-off and can only ever be, it's like the film or the book, it can only ever be a kind of cheap ersatz version of the original thing, and kind of keeping aware of that and going with that as well.
That was going to be one of my questions about how do you deal with the fact that you are having to tell what a comic book would normally just show.
I've actually, I'm a very descriptive writer, so a lot of people have said that. A lot of people say, "Oh, my books! Oh, Anna, your book's so cinematic; they should be filmed." Sort of like, no, they really shouldn't be filmed, because I spend a lot of time in my books writing and setting the scene. And my father he did a master's degree in and then taught a course on film theory, and he'd spend. I grew up. Again, this kind of blessed childhood. I grew up with him spending a lot of time at home analysing films. So he'd analyse the whole, I remember him going through Alien and Bill and Ted, like virtually, on freeze frame, and you analyse, the sets, the costumes, the lighting, the sound. So it's not just about, it's how all those elements come together to create the story. And it's not just about the plot, it's about all those little details. And it's not even just about the visuals, it's about the sound, the lighting, the soundtrack. And so I approach writing in a very similar way, where I spend a lot of time, I desperately want to be able to write things like lens flare, or things like a kind of, there's sort of wonderful kind of things like that sort of David Lynch does a lot, where you have the kind of soundtrack and you have someone speaking and it's not actually kind of directly related to the image that you have on the screen. And of course comic books do that so beautifully as well. So I try and kind of write like that. so it wasn't that much of a step to be trying to kind of create the detail that you have in the drawings in prose, because that's kind of what I think about anyway. I mean, describing death, have this sort of moment where Anderson is forced for the first time to kind of accept this is all real, open her eyes, and there is death. He is in her, they are kind of, she can see him, and she now knows what he is, and actually describing him, that was, things like that were just so much fun. And trying to describe big choreographed fight scenes. I do have scenes where people are gunning around on their bikes with the big, and trying to describe all of that, and the sound of it and the smell of it, and trying to describe Megacity 1, what it must smell like, what it must feel like, to be Anderson on a kind of, when she's happy, just riding a bike down one of those big megways, just kind of, just enjoying herself. And then the kind of horror of, death creeping into the nightclub, and that kind of describing all of that was just wonderful. It was really, really enjoyable, and kind of, it was, I wanted it to have that really visual sense to it, and to sort of capture that. I actually, when I was a teenager, I used to write comic book scripts, and I can't draw in the slightest. I came from when I was kind of, obviously I wrote stories when I was a child, but the first things I wrote kind of more seriously when I was old enough to be writing something that was vaguely approaching goodish were in fact comic book scripts. So it kind of came back full circle. So I've always kind of thought about that. If I could do in prose what comic books do, one day I'll find out how to do that, and then it will be, and then it will be wonderful. So it felt quite natural. I mean, I did have this lovely humbling moment where I was talking to a friend on the school run who's he's a graphic designer and an artist, and he's a massive, massive fan of the art of 2000 AD particularly. So I sort of said, I've got this amazing, it's just unbelievable, I'm writing a 2000 AD story. And he was like, oh, who's illustrating it? And I was like, oh, no, it's a novel, it's not being illustrated. And he was like, oh. Which was kind of one of those kind of humbling moments as an author, when you're like, oh, yeah. Because as far as he was concerned, the text is only a hook for the art. So to keep remembering that kind of, as far as I was concerned, well, I'm wax lyrical about the art of death and the art of mortis. In the end, the art is only, the text is paramount, and the art is there to give you the text, to help support the text. For him, it was just, it could say, the dialogue could be absolutely terrible as long as the art was good. And so that was quite humbling, kind of like, okay, remember that.
If it's any consolation, the sheer number of times I've told normies out in the world, oh yeah, I work for 2000 AD, and they go, oh, what do you do the art? Do you do the scripts? No, I do the marketing. Yeah. Oh. Wander off. It's a small world. We're kind of rattling towards the end of our time. I want to talk a little bit, because we've talked a lot about Judge Death, but of course this is all taking place in Anderson's head, and the Anderson of Death Lives is a very particular type of Anderson. It's this wisecracking Debbie Harry-like character, and there's been an awful lot of water under the bridge since then. Not least things like Necropolis and Half-Life, and the Fall of Dead World and things like that. What was your hope in terms of your portrayal of Anderson, and was it to bring a little cynical, grimdark edge to her, or did you want to kind of lean into the kind of wisecracking? I nearly called her a sidekick, because she was never a sidekick, but like a supporting character. Let's put it that way.
Yes, I first encountered Anderson through Shambhala, where she goes. She and the Russian psychic go to, must be Tibet, and you see her having this and she's and her heart's broken. She's just she's just mourning because her best friend, whose name has completely gone from my head, has committed suicide. And then
Corey.
Corey, yes. And then she meets the Russian psychic agent, and they have this intense connection. And then he is sacrificed. And so I first met her as someone who has intense, really kind of deep human feelings, and she's one of the few characters who, she's has this deep love, and her heart is broken again and again. And then to go back and encounter her as this kind of, as she appears in Judge Death originally, as this kind of wisecracking, winking, you're almost like, whoa, that's quite different. But I kind of wanted to have both of that sense that, with it, I'm sort of told, she's the backstory is she's quite a rookie when we get to Judge Death. When she appears in Judge Death, she's actually new on the scene. And you're like, okay, maybe she's acting the way I might around Judge Dredd in that circumstance, where she's putting on a front, she's putting on the sass, she's nervous inside, as anyone would be, kind of assigned to kind of Judge Death. Judge Dredd needs to ask, we're sending you. You'd put on that sass, you'd put on that kind of extra. And of course, she is wonderfully sexualized in her heels and her ridiculously tight jumpsuit. And to go into all of that, but also have that really deep humanity, that kind of, she's just so alive and so vibrant and so joyful and so much more complex than someone like Dredd. And to actually kind of, to really have that sense of her as, I guess she is, one of those, I think a lot of people who really love her. So she's actually, she's the kind of person that they would like to be. She's funny, she's witty, she doesn't seem particularly intimidated. That kind of, she's told, she comes out of the plastic coffin, she's told, go and rest, you've been through this terrible experience. She's like, no, I am going to take Judge Death down again. And that wonderful scene where she and Dredd go bursting through the force field to get into the block when they're in Judge Dredd Lives. She's this really kind of, she's incredibly confident, she's incredibly sassy, but she's also incredibly vulnerable. She's really, really human. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to kind of write that. And I think actually knowing that about her, that knowing all the later stuff that happens to her, and you can kind of, you can kind of really round out the way she is in those early stories by kind of saying, well, she's young, she's almost kind of trying too hard. I do have this, I had this lovely line about her walking into the morgue, and she's been, they've told we need the best psychic we can get, so we need the best idea of consent, and they sent Anderson, and had, I imagined her strutting in there, that her boots really kind of clicking on the floor, she's maybe making her hips and her shoulders do a little wiggle because she's scared, and because she's kind of projecting a kind of sexual feminine power, but also a kind of confident sexual womanly power, because she's bravado. Nervous. Yes, a kind of a very female bravado, because she's nervous. And that really kind of, I really liked writing her like that, and I just felt really kind of, she is the kind of person I'd like to be, I think, and she's always been the kind of person I'd like to be.
Just to round off a question, if there was more on the horizon in terms of writing Anderson, is there another point in her story that you kind of would like to explore? Is there more in this relationship between her and Death that you'd like to go into?
Actually, I don't think so. I think I kind of found closure on this. I kind of, I mean, it felt kind of, I wouldn't want to kind of keep it going. I kind of feel I have to admit, I don't read the modern, I'm terribly sorry, I don't read the kind of current run of 2000 AD. The stuff I really enjoy is that stuff from a particular moment in my childhood. And I kind of wouldn't want to touch things further, if you see what I mean. There is sort of, I wouldn't want to sort of have things going on for too long. I do sometimes, I would want to kind of, I've written this thing about these two characters that I just, it's this kind of perfect moment of the two of them are just so, they are just so perfect together. They work so beautifully as a kind of antithesis to each other. And I kind of wouldn't want to keep that going for too long because it would dilute it. I think I kind of feel, this is a story I really enjoy telling. And I think actually lots of people are like, oh my God, that's a story I really want to read. That's kind of, it's really interesting. You just said that I kind of had always assumed that Judge Death and Judge Anderson would come back. You kind of, because you kind of think, okay, when you read Judge Death, you're kind of like, okay, this is really short. And it does just end. And there's a pretty clear sense this is the end. But that can't possibly be the end. How, these characters are just so good. It must, they can't just have intended to stop. It can't just have been a kind of like, oh God, we need a filler for next week. Someone just, we just need a one-off before we go into the next big storyline. Because they're just everything about the way that they work together and is just so perfect. And to go, it feels like the most amazing privilege to have been able to go on and kind of tell that story. But I wouldn't want it to kind of just go on and get kind of bigger and bigger and more kind of accumulated with kind of, but the plot twist is, or kind of, but kind of, that the way that a lot of long running things do with a kind of, well, maybe we'll have some kind of time travel thing where kind of actually Anderson knew Judge Death's mum because, kind of that sort of, the way you get those kind of accumulations of stuff, which just kind of diffuses it. It kind of just weakens it, in my opinion, just kind of dilutes the kind of original purity of kind of just these two characters and this kind of incredibly bizarre relationship that they have and this kind of incredible couple of storylines they have. And I don't think I'd want to keep revisiting it because you just lose stuff. There are some things I wouldn't touch at all, to be honest. If someone said to me, would I like to write Slain or Nemesis? I just say, no, those stand and no one is allowed to touch those stories because they end where they ended. And, that's like saying kind of, you don't mess with perfection. You don't go on.
There is something really satisfying about certain stories coming to their logical conclusion. It is just a satisfying thing as a reader.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Well, our time is up. Thank you so much, Anna, for chatting with us about Anderson versus Death, which is out on the 23rd of September. Both in print and in ebook. So make sure you pre-order.
It's an audiobook as well, actually.
Audiobook.
Yes, I narrated the audiobook, which
that's great.
Yeah, I sat in a little room and I got to shout "Grod!" and I got to keep saying the crime is life, sentence is death. I was just
did you put on the voice for good death?
I tried, the crime is life, the sentence is death. I tried. My son could do it beautifully. But I was sitting in this little room shouting like, "Grod, for God's sake!" I was like, oh my God, this is just absolutely unbelievably cool. This is just...
Wonderful. Well, make sure you pre-order your copy, audiobook, or look out for the digital copy on 23rd September. In the meantime, thank you very much to Anna for being our guest.
Yeah, thank you.
Every Wednesday. We should be back in 7 days' time for more from the Galaxy's Greatest Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to 2000 AD. Make sure you subscribe to 2000 AD newsletter. It's all on the website. You know where it is, for goodness sake. So we should be back. In the meantime, it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Chloe. It's goodbye from Anna. And until next time, Earthlets, Splendid Verthrig.
See you next week.
Get 2000 AD now. Get
Well, thanks for joining us on In Orbit every Wednesday, Earthlets. Make sure you like and subscribe and go along to 2000 AD, where you'll be able to subscribe to 2000 AD and the Judge Dredd magazine. Sign up to our newsletter and you'll get hundreds of pages of free comics to download. And download the app for your Apple and Android devices. Now, don't forget, Earthlets, this is the 2000 AD universe. We just live in it.